pursued with a sense of renewed urgency and an ability to do things differently. Recognizing this existing need and emerging priority, UNDP has enshrined the need to secure sustainable human development along with a healthy planet as the overall goal of our strategic plan for 2026 to 2029. The future does not offer a choice between human development and a healthy planet. It is not an either-or equation, as the twin objectives of accelerating human development while easing pressures on the planetary boundaries need to be pursued in tandem. Recognizing this imperative and translating this vision into action, UNDP is developing a Nature Relationship Index, an NRI, to complement the Human Development Index and to reset the definition of progress by orienting it towards a future where people and nature thrive together as mutually beneficial. It proposes to look at three dimensions. One, nature is thriving and accessible. Two, nature is used with care. And three, nature is safeguarded. Not new. We've been espousing some of these views for a long time, but now we want to ensure that there is a companion index to our Human Development Index. In consonance with this overall vision, the Resilient Urban Futures flagship initiative, which is being piloted by UNDP, is intended to realize the strategic objective of resilience to risk and development sustainability through a nature-infused and a nature-positive development approach. Integrating nature-based solutions into urban risk reduction initiatives is increasingly an inalienable part of our urban resilience action. In that regard, UNDP has partnered with Taunji University to build technical and programmatic capacities among policymakers and city counterparts to help mainstream nature-based solutions into urban planning and development by combining gray-green infrastructure to offer sustainable, cost-effective, and alternatives to typical urban infrastructure typologies. This is humanity's next frontier, and it will require us to be nimble, innovative, and complementary. That is, informed by a all-hands-on-deck thinking. Intersecting these issues and challenges, shared risk and vulnerabilities, and universal sustainability objectives merit a joined-up and shared policy and programmatic approach. UNDP is therefore committed to pursue this vision in collaboration and complementarity, and is already engaging a wide spectrum of organizations and partners to advance action in a joined-up manner. With this brief overview and outline, let me use the privilege of being the moderator to share a brief presentation on UNDP's urban resilience work. And then afterwards, I will invite my erudite speakers, and as I said before, we have two online and two physically here with us, to share their thoughts and perspectives. Before I jump into my presentation, let me invite my speakers to please join me on the podium. I don't want to be here lonely on the podium, so please join me and to take one of the available seats. So let me jump quickly into our presentation, and it's just a quick overview of what UNDP is doing to try and advance this urban resilience flagship, but looking at issues around infusing nature-based solutions into our urban planning work. Just quickly, a little bit about UNDP. Who are we? Well, we're seen to be the largest development organization in the UN system, maybe not the largest in terms of delivering development support in the multilateral system. That would be the IFIs in terms of their throughput, but also some of the bilateral donors that are working with countries in the developing South and least developing countries. We are doing so through what we now call a 3x4. Oops, lost my screen. As we work through the challenges with technology, we're doing so through a 3x4 approach, moving from what was previously a 3x6x3 approach, where we had three areas, directions of change, 3 solutions, development solutions, and 3 enablers. Now we talk about 3 accelerators, which is digital, AI, gender equality, and sustainable finance, and 4 strategic objectives, looking at prosperity for all, effective governance, a healthy planet, and of course, crisis and resilience. The UNDP remains a committed partner to working more closely with other partners within the UN system, but also outside of the UN system, to deliver on these strategic imperatives. As we reflect a little bit on our urban resilience work, we have a framework which is driven by 3 dimensions, 5 strategic priorities, with 2 sets of risk scenarios. We see water, energy as 2 of the big issues facing society today, and that will face society in the future. So water certainly is one of those areas we've picked up on in the work that we're doing. There are other parts of our house that is looking at energy resilience, and certainly these will be featured in our localization agenda coming into cities as well. But we've zeroed in primarily to water-related issues, water risk, and of course, extreme heat. And as I said, this is certainly a very good segue into the presentation you would have heard earlier. And one of the big approaches we're trying to take at UNDP is to bring this harmonization again between disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. So we're trying to bring these 2 processes, these 2 communities back together for various reasons, to create greater impact, greater effect, to be able to scale some of the resources that we command as an organization, because at the moment, they're pursued sometimes as separate pillars, when in fact, they really are dealing with some of the fundamental issues, risks, and the drivers and root causes. I forgot. Let me jump back a little bit that I need to point. So in terms of our approaches, we have a few interventions that we have already pursued on, and I will focus here on our Beat the Heat campaign in Nepal, looking at the city of Dangadi. And here we're trying to expand green canopies and rooftop gardens. We're looking at creating shaded green corridors and rooftops with climate-resilient tree species to reduce heat and to provide co-benefits. We're looking at installing water coolers and earthen drinking pots to set up water dispensers and traditional clay water pots in high-temperature hotspots through community and business partnerships, so linking also to the local culture. We're looking at reviving and restoring local water bodies, revitalizing ponds, wetlands, and lakes with green infrastructure and permeable surfaces to lower surrounding temperatures, to use heat-reflective paint on public structures, to ensure that buildings and transit station roofs can reduce the heat absorption. And 5th, to implement community-centric heat-resilient strategies. Here, driving the local adaptation programs, including awareness campaigns and community participation. And we've also set up a crowdfunding campaign to bring other resources, both within Nepal itself, but outside of Nepal, to support the municipality on this particular journey. What we found is that many of these small and medium cities are often, the least to receive some of the financing opportunities to deliver on some of these initiatives. So we're bringing the solutions, but also trying to connect it to different ways of innovative financing. Another of our interventions, we look to Bosnia-Herzegovina, where we are looking at the city of Doboj in the Verbaj Basin. And here we're looking at ecosystems-based disaster risk reduction, where we're looking at applying afforestation, riparian buffers, vegetation belts, and soil bioengineering to lower flood and landslide risk in the basin. We're also looking at measures of sustainable land management, introducing sustainable farming and minimum tillage, contour strips, and agroforestry to combat land degradation and support climate-resilient livelihoods. We're looking at green infrastructure that restore floodplains and establish water retention areas as natural buffers that complement traditional engineering measures. And we're looking at an ecosystems approach. We're engaging local communities in flood preparedness and response planning supported by participatory and GIS in using the Verbas geoportal. In Koshi and Gandaki River Basin communities, and here we're again in Nepal, we're looking at what's happening in the Himalayas. And here we notice that it's heating up, posing rising threat not just to Nepal, but to millions living downstream. The glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalaya are melting faster than ever, and this is causing glacial lake to swell and increasing the risk of sudden destructive floods. Some of the key components of this particular intervention of a 7-year project that we have include expanding and upgrading hazard monitoring and early warning systems, reducing water levels in 4 high-risk glacial lakes, strengthening riverbanks and flood-prone areas through reforestation of around 150 hectares, and protective infrastructure such as check dams, vegetative gabion walls, and helping national, local authorities and first responders to better plan and prepare for future risks. In the Belarus wetland, in 2020, the wetlands project implemented by UNDP supporting the Ministry of Environment using funding from the GEF, we planted peatland seeds to rehabilitate damaged areas, peatland areas, and in the Lida district of Haronda region, we utilize also technology to help restore the fen mire within a 5-year period. So that project is currently ongoing and coming to its closure. Belarus has already tested this particular approach and is now successfully applying the method of ecological restoration of disturbed raised bogs by raising the water table through construction and a system of hydrological engineering facilities. This method serves to gradually restore all functions of the peatland ecosystem, but requires more time, restoration, and planning and the planting of more peatland plants. So I think that gives you a quick insight into how we're using nature-based solutions to address our urban resilience initiative. We're doing it in situ in some of the cities, but also looking at the ridge to reef context around what's happening in the uplands and how it is impacting the resilience of some of our urban areas. We have several partnerships with academia, civil society, philanthropic organizations, and it's one of the reasons why we're happy to be here, to continue to expand that partnership and to tap into some of the innovative work that's happening in the centers of research. And this gives you a quick snapshot of some of our initiatives globally. Thank you very much. And with that, let me jump into our panelists. We have with us, as I said before, 4 esteemed speakers. The first speaker is Dr. Marianne Kjellén, with whom I have also had the privilege of working quite closely during a stint with UNDP. She's an associate professor in human geography and a member of the Independent Technical Advisory Panel, ITAP, of the Green Climate Fund. She has more than 30 years in international development cooperation. And previously, Marianne has worked nearly 10 years with UNDP, initially with the country office in Tanzania, and more recently as senior water advisor with the Bureau for Policy and Program Support of UNDP. Given her role as an international expert with the GCF, it will be in fitness of things to hear about how climate finance is being leveraged to address water challenges and to serve communities better. Marianne will be speaking to us on doing more with less, augmenting the effectiveness of climate finance in addressing water challenges and serving communities better. Let me therefore hand the floor to Marianne. Let me say welcome and thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from you, Marianne. Over to you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you so much, and good morning to everybody. Thanks also for inviting me to speak at this event. Yes, on doing more with less, augmenting the effectiveness of climate financing and addressing water challenges and serving communities better. Let me see here. So what this means, or what I bring to this conference, are 3 main points. That policy, which guides the direction of all developments, can do much more than no matter how many projects we bring. Also knowledge, is the foundation for green infrastructure and also early warning systems. And above all, efficiency is really what is doing more with less, using existing supplies or existing resources much better. And there is a lot that urban authorities can do in this area. Nature-based adaptation and resilience approaches remain underfunded and under-recognized in urban planning in developing countries, says the world's most recent World Cities report, and I totally agree. However, there's a reason for why they remain underfunded, because mostly they're being pursued as a project-by-project approach. And we need to shift this towards having, well, green and gray, of course, well, blended approaches to weave the green and nature-based solutions into our policies and urban building regulations. That way, they can apply across the board to all projects. So, for example, reducing flooding through building codes. A landscape approach is necessary to address or to manage floods. And also, so there is, no matter how many projects we have, we need to address across the board. This image tries to say that, of course, most of it is in the urban basin, but then also in local areas, land management can do a lot to reduce peak floods. And also the World Cities report suggests that an increase of just 1% in impervious area could expand its flood-prone area more than 10%. And this actually means that one parking lot can make a lot of damage and make futile all the efforts by the others. So again, suggesting that it be applied in policy across the board and, for example, require all developments to have, say, green spaces, like a minimum percentage per development being vegetated, permeable material for pavements, incentivizing the infiltration of water, and also flood retention rules to keep first rainfall on the grounds. And much more. There is so much can be done on flood management, urban heat island, and many issues. But the key thing is that regulation must be predictable and transparent and applied across the board. Coming to knowledge, which is fundamental for nature-based solutions as well as early warning systems. And UNDP works with early warning systems, and also the Green Climate Fund supports the Secretary General's call for early warnings for all. So I see many projects, proposals in that regard. But I am struck at how much proponents ask for the capital investment into hydrometeorological monitoring, and relatively little for the knowledge development needed in the information, the protocols for disseminating warning messages, and above all, training communities and everybody how to respond in case of a disaster. So there's more room for knowledge, I think, but also generally for nature-based, or should I say people-based solutions. They're not necessarily cheaper. There is typically much less capital expended, but there can often be more operational expenditure needed. And especially because you need to work with people and you bring in new types of knowledge. For nature-based solutions, we have to understand the workings of ecosystems and how we can harmonize with nature. And of course, and this is something that's not new to indigenous peoples that have worked with what we call traditional ecological knowledge for millennia, maybe. Finally, on efficiency, a point is to use more efficiently the resources we have rather than going further afield to find new. Many cities are facing the reality that water is becoming more scarce and rainfall is more erratic and much harder to predict. a very typical response is to go for new and diversified sources, including desalination or new groundwater fields, and also increased water reuse. We see a lot also proposals coming to the Green Climate Fund. And these are very important solutions, but they all also require more energy. There is more energy needed for pumping from increasingly distant sources, and also for treating effluents for reuse. Can also be very energy intensive. So I think we have an elephant in the room, which is the global leakage. And it's at the level of a third. It's been estimated to some 30% of water leaking from water systems. And in the water industry, this goes as non-revenue water, which includes also, apart from the physical losses, also include water that is stolen or not paid for or not even charged for. Lindberg and Wyatt calculated the global level of non-revenue water to some 126 billion cubic meters lost per year, representing some 13 billion US dollars in foregone revenue. Or as shown in this graph here, between 35 and over 200 liters per capita per day lost from beneficial use. Actually, this is a mystery to me. Which industry in their right mind accepts losing between a third or even half of its produce? But I can understand how come this has not been at the forefront of climate financing. Because weak governance and poor management, they're not climate issues per se. But, and this is the key point, is that reducing non-revenue water and reducing leakage, it's the most effective climate efficient water intervention that we have. So, and such interventions, they're also at the reach of urban utilities or local government. So you don't really need to have externally funded projects to achieve that. And that actually brings us back to the point of policy. So it's really improving the policies across the board that can make many of these things viable. So doing more with less, augmenting the effectiveness of climate financing and addressing water challenges and serving communities better. I want to impress on you that policy is more than projects. Knowledge is more than infrastructure, and efficiency is really doing more with less. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Absolutely. Some very key takeaways you captured at the end there. The importance of moving away from this projectized approach and really looking to see how well we can infuse these interventions into our policies, or strategies, or legislation and plan as a norm. Very important key takeaway. The role of land management in reducing floods, and of course the imbalance between the allocation of financing across the 4 pillars of the people-centered early warning. Not just looking at infrastructure, and again you said infrastructure, we also need to look at knowledge, but we also need to look at how we help communities react to and utilize and respond to this knowledge. You pointed out the role of climate finance in addressing this third of leakage, this 30% leakage that is happening. So very important points packaged and delivered within that 7 minutes, I think was quite powerful. Let me now turn to our next speaker. We're going to hear a little bit about initiatives implemented to strengthen urban resilience and climate adaptation action by learning about positive spin-off benefits of nature-based solutions in Baku's coastal area. And so I'm pleased to invite Dr. Tural Aliyev, who is an urban planner and a social scientist and a postdoctoral researcher at the Swiss Federation Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology. He works within the Policy Analysis and Environmental Governance Group and contributes to the Green City Net project, which fosters social ecological networks to enhance biodiversity in urban green areas. During his doctoral studies, he collaborated with UNECE Center of Excellence on Smart Sustainable Cities and the UNEP Green City project, focusing on nature-based solutions and green infrastructure for sustainable urban development. Over to you, Dr. Tural, to hear about your case study on Baku. Sure. Sure. Yes, you may.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ronan, for your introduction and for your presentation. In line with IPCC presentation and your introduction, I would like also to show the current states of urban resilience on the Caspian Sea, but more specifically on the city of Baku, to understand within the climate and environmental change how the city of Baku, which hosts COP29 last year, are affected by climate and environmental change. Yeah. So I would like to start about the evidence, scientific evidence on the fluctuation of the sea level in the Caspian Sea, which should be key for future strategies on the coastal urban development. So what we see for the last 200 years that the Caspian Sea level has irregularities and fluctuation. And within the 4 meters of variation, basically, which means that sea level can rise up 2.5 meters and drop 1.5 meters within the natural variation cycle. So it's a natural variation cycle. We need to have strategies to adapt and mitigate based on this scenario for the last 200 years. Currently, Caspian Sea is shrinking, and still it's within the natural variation cycle. What happened that in 1970s, the sea level was dropping dramatically, and then suddenly, unexpected to the scientific community, sea level suddenly started to rise, which caused flooding and damages to all the coastal cities and also to the city of Baku. Within this knowledge, what happens currently in the city of Baku and in the coastal area is that the major infrastructure projects are situated on the coastal area. And what we see on this area that we see convergence between urbanization, high urbanization, densification, and environmental change, which is great exposure to new sets of hazards and risk, which cause also new sets of vulnerabilities. So we see, if we take into account 2.5 meters of rise of sea level, the major infrastructure of the city on the coastal area could be under the water. And what we are also seeing here is that the coastal urban area, which have been transformed from industrial in early 20s into the reserve place, or if we can say, and then into the public space. So it's somehow we see the elements of old school planning, but we need to think in terms of integrating risk management planning. So the coastal public spaces, urban spaces, should be more adaptive and anticipatory toward the future possible risks and challenges. So in terms of if we would like to be prepared and mitigate the possible future increase of water level, the coastal areas should, as a natural barrier, should affect this and mitigate this and reduce the risk. Here we are talking about nature-based solution, natural specificity of the coastal area, also engineer-based solution, but also integrated risk management should take into account the decrease of the sea level. So here, of course, we we should talk about multifunctional urban spaces and the strategies which could have double effects in the case of sea level rise or decline of sea level. For instance, ecological corridors, biological reserves, flexible zones, which should reduce the possible impacts of shrinking of sea level and possible affect dust storms and increasing salinity. So these nature-based solutions should have double effects and double strategies in case of both scenarios. So the concept of resilience also was mentioned by Ronald as a definition from UN Habitat, as the ability to adapt to the shock and also to continue to functioning during the shock, and also to adapt in the future scenarios. But also what is important is the learning from negative experience. So what I showed in the case of the Caspian Sea, we already had this negative experience of variation, dramatic variation of the sea level. So we need to be prepared for this scenario. And the concept of resilience has been also changed. Today we should talk more about, we should start by reviewing science. So scientific evidence should be at the core of assessing vulnerability, risks, and developing adaptation plan, which should be based on the, of course, local specificity, social behavior, human impact, governance structure, policies, linkage analysis for integrated solution, adaptive management for sustainability, and implementation of adaptation and monitoring adaptation. So here we should also bring citizens in co-design of the development plan and also implementation. And of course, the monitoring implementation is also key from all the stakeholder partners, including citizens. So we need to think in terms of sustainable coastal urbanization, about integrative solutions, participatory governance, and urgency of action. And as I said, we need to be prepared, and we need to have anticipatory plans and flexible zones in case of, for both scenarios, rise and decrease of the sea level, which should be the part of integrated risk management planning of the coastal zone. Thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tural. So you really gave us some insights into the specific challenges that are being faced by Baku, and the need. Certainly, I think the theme throughout your presentation really called on us to look at urban centers, particularly those that are in coastal context, to be anticipatory and to be adaptable to the future scenarios of sea levels. You know, whether it rises or it falls, the city needs to be able to adapt. And you gave some options, you know, from flexible zoning, among another set or range of approaches, and the importance of participatory governance in ensuring that people are connected to this process. Our next speaker, David Jácome-Polit, I hope I pronounced the name correctly, who leads the Resilient Development Team at ICLEI World Secretariat. He has been a former Chief Resilience Officer and Metropolitan Director of Resilience in Quito, Ecuador, a resilience advocate and an urban systems thinker. David works at the intersection of socioeconomic and spatial exclusion and the effects of extreme natural events, including the ones related to climate change, while ensuring access to essentials such as water, food, and energy, the real nexus of today and tomorrow, better livelihoods and living conditions, transport, and labor opportunities. David will speak to us on the role of city networks in advancing nature-based solutions for urban resilience, with a focus on peer-to-peer learning, shared governance, and systemic approaches. David, I'm happy to yield the floor to you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me clearly. And it is a pleasure to join this discussion alongside my colleagues. And in fact, I do want to bring to your attention, hopefully, a fresh perspective on nature-based solutions, urban development, and the role of city networks and cities themselves. As we think about enhancing urban resilience through nature-based solutions, I hope I can put on the table a couple of points to help us move from ambition to real implementation. As we all know, cities are on the front lines of climate change, flooding, heat waves, water scarcity affecting them, and often compounded by rapid urbanization and inequality, particularly in the global south. Nature-based solutions allow us to address these risks while also delivering multiple co-benefits: cleaner air, healthier communities, biodiversity, jobs, and a stronger social cohesion depending on how these interventions are designed. And if you see examples from around the world, you can even think of nature-based solutions as innovative ways to address the structural problems that sometimes are quite difficult to face. Medellin, for example, in Colombia, they see nature-based solutions and their interventions not only to deliver the benefits that I was mentioning before, but also as a way of anticipating informal settlements in places where they shouldn't be located, meaning preventing the creation of additional risk scenarios, which usually happens in a systematic manner in the global south. And so if we expand the boundaries and if we think innovatively, we can describe nature-based solutions as multi-solving. Restored wetland reduces flood, but also improves water quality and offers recreational space. Green roofs lower energy demand while cooling the city and creating local jobs. These solutions help steer cities toward more resilient and just development pathways. It's about getting the cities to walk through the right path, but scaling them requires new ways of working, and this is where city networks can play a unique role. I would like to highlight three contributions in particular. Peer-to-peer learning. Cities learn best from each other, particularly when they are in the same context. Networks provide a trusted space to share what works, what doesn't, and how challenges were overcome. Shared governance. By coming together, cities shape the global agenda and strengthen their collective voice in advocating for urban nature-based solutions, which helps unlock financing and influence policies. And systemic approaches. MBS are not just green projects, they connect with water, housing, health, and equity. Networks help break down silos, which usually is the way how local governments operate, and integrate MBS into broader resilience strategies. So let me illustrate this with three examples. The first one is Caño Martín Peña in Puerto Rico, which basically turned an infrastructural project into a community development project, bringing in opportunities for equity and resilience. A flood-prone, polluted river channel running through an informal settlement was restored while residents organized a community land trust. The result was not just improved flood management, but also protection from displacement and the transformation into a sustainable community. And actually, it also addressed one of the structural problems that you face in Global South, which is land rights. It provided an alternative to solve that particular problem. Another example is the Clever Cities and Horizon 2020 project, which is another powerful case. It showed how in my home city, Quito, MBS would be co-created with residents, NGOs, and with city authorities. But beyond that, it also influenced public policy. Nature-based solutions right now are part of the development plan and budget priorities in that particular city, helping mainstream nature-based solutions, secure funding, and create conditions for replication in other cities that might be inspired by the network. And finally, Urban by Nature, a global facilitated program that builds bridges among cities, researchers, SMEs, and NGOs. It enables peer-to-peer learning across Europe, Asia, Latin America, and beyond, helping cities that are just starting with MBS to learn from more advanced experiences and vice versa. So these are not abstract ideas. These are practical, systemic, and deeply social approaches. But they also remind us that scaling requires policy alignment, financing, which was mentioned before, and above all, inclusive processes that keep vulnerable communities at the center. Looking forward, I see 5 strategies as particularly important. Mainstreaming nature-based solutions into city planning and budgets beyond pilots. Measure and communicate co-benefits to build the investment case. Blend financing and partnerships, since public funds alone are not enough. Strengthen local capacity for design and implementation. Prioritize equity and participation so resilience benefits everyone and no one is left behind. So to close, nature-based solutions are not a question of whether they work. We know they do. The real challenge is scaling them fairly and effectively. This is where collaboration through city networks becomes essential. Learning from each other, building collective voices, and connecting MVS to wider urban systems. That's how we bridge the gap between ambition and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much. Moving from adaptation to implementation, the sort of key message of your presentation, and where you provided some real-life examples of how you are getting cities to not just talk, but to walk the talk or walk the right path, as you framed it, along 3 particular examples of peer-to-peer, shared governance, systemic approaches, providing the ability to transfer these learning across your network of cities, whether they are in the developed north or developed south. And in particular, you close by giving us, again, the importance of mainstreaming, of measuring for impact, of blending financing with public as well as other financial sources, and importance prioritizing equity, among others. So it was great hearing from you, David. Now let's move to our next speaker. We're going to hear from Dr. Abishek Narayan about the perspectives related to reuse of water in an urban context as a key opportunity to build resilience. Dr. Abishek is a researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology. His transdisciplinary research focuses on planning of water and sanitation globally in light of climate change and urbanization. He has made significant contributions to the field of citywide inclusive sanitation, integrated urban service planning, and water reuse. His work has been in collaboration with several international organizations, including the UN agencies, the World Bank, ADB, BMGF, and GIZ. Let me thank you for joining us, Doc, and certainly I yield the floor to you, and we're looking forward to hearing your perspectives. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to borrow Ronald's initial presentation with a 3x4 matrix, and I'm going to give you 3 examples and 4 guiding principles of how do we leverage urban water systems to build resilience. Now, the first one that I'd like to begin with is decentralized wastewater treatment and reuse. It's typically, think about this entire campus that we are in, which is shared by EMPA and Eawag, or just across the road, there are residential buildings. Imagine if we can create a circular loop of water that's being treated and reused within those premises. So that's roughly what I'm talking about. And this concept is really seen as a paradigm shift, and it's not something that is exclusive to, let's say, high-income cities or only low-income cities in the global south, to say. But it's something that's driven by different factors. Factors could be, climate-related water scarcity. It could be pollution and nutrient management, which leads to urban lakes and urban water bodies being polluted, and even you might have seen pictures of lakes frothing across the world because of pollution entering these systems. Or it can also be driven by progressive goals of creating net zero neighborhoods, of creating circular cities and so on. So there could be different sets of drivers. But why is it important when we talk about resilience to shocks that are created, such as floods and droughts and perhaps even heat waves? Because the first foundational principle in engineering that we have to understand: when we decentralize, we remove the possibility of domino effects or system failures that often happen in cities. Imagine a centralized infrastructure. If there's a big flood, then obviously the entire city that's dependent on that particular infrastructure is going to be affected. So once you start decentralizing infrastructure, we are starting to build more resilience. So that's one of the first reasons why we need to think about decentralization positively. Second, as a second degree impact, is if system failures happen, especially when we talk about water and sanitation systems, one of the most important things that you might have always seen in the news right after a flood or a drought is public health failures. You might have seen cholera epidemics, you might have seen typhoids, and all of these waterborne diseases that happen. Once you start thinking about decentralizing, and once you start putting instruments in place which prevent failures, which have very good water quality sort of indicators to say what kind of reuse purposes can these be thought through, you're also starting to secure the second degree impact on public health. Now, the reason why nature-based systems are particularly interesting for decentralized infrastructure is, let's not just think about the city we are in, which is Zurich or Geneva, but also let's move to cities like Nairobi or Kampala, or cities in India, which could be Delhi or Mumbai, or cities in Latin America. They are very dense. And if you want to start decentralizing infrastructure, there's just not enough space. And nature-based infrastructure gives us an opportunity to start using landscaping space, where you can have these plant-based treatment, whether it's phytoremediation, or you can also start thinking about simple microbial-based treatment that is happening underneath a parking space. So your requirement for space and the ability for these NBS systems to blend within existing urban infrastructure is quite high. Therefore, decentralized water reuse is quite an interesting option, thinking about it from the perspective of urban resilience. And one fundamental point, just like the decentralization, is once you start reusing water, your dependence on freshwater systems obviously decrease, which means that in events of droughts or in events of centralized water systems failure, you're still able to survive, because now you have a resilient circular system which you have a good degree of control over within your premises. So that's number one. And the second example is not so much based on my academic work, but based on my previous life, where I was also working with a local government through the 100 Resilient Cities Partnership by the Rockefeller Foundation, where we saw several cities, especially in Asia, have these sort of urban water bodies that is ubiquitous in cities. Now, just to give you a statistic, according to the World Water Development Reports by UN Water, we know that about 75% of wastewater is left untreated. And when it comes to cities, 80% of urban waters, especially in cities of the global south, are polluted, which means that it's not usable for drinking, it's not usable for bathing, it's probably not even usable if you're living in these lake view apartments and there's not a pretty lake to view, right? So in these kinds of setups, for example, my home city, which is in Chennai, it's a South Indian city, 2015 there was a big flood, 2016 there was a big flood, 2017 there was a big drought, 2018 there was a big drought, and then guess what? The cycle just kept continuing. And this is the reality that we will be living with. So to start thinking about existing water infrastructure within cities as sponges where you can start storing flood water and use them, of course, as a natural filtration process to improve groundwater levels. But also during droughts, these are the systems that are going to give you water when you need. For example, the city, after suffering lots of droughts, started thinking about reusing these mining quarries that are within the city's vicinity to become water storage. So the stormwater systems were starting to be designed to flow into these quarries. So you really have the sponge city sort of thinking that can go in here. And number 3 that I want to quickly mention is development goals also contribute to climate resilience, and from both a mitigation perspective and an adaptation perspective. And I'm talking in the perspective of water and sanitation, which is in cities, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, one of the largest greenhouse gas emissions is actually not coming from industries or cars or trucks, but it's actually coming from toilets, because the waste is stored underground and under what we call as anaerobic conditions. So there's not enough oxygen for the waste to get decomposed, and therefore it starts emitting tons of methane. Now the IPCC has greatly underestimated the impacts or the emission profiles of these systems underground. And at a city scale, this is one of the most major contributors that we have only very limited scientific data to show that here is the global average. That's why they never made it to the IPCC reports, because they always assumed human waste is part of the carbon cycle. Not if you make it anaerobic. Then you're releasing methane, which is 27 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So once you start thinking about development goals and you start investing in some of the most basic infrastructure, from not just from a containment perspective, but all through treatment, you're actually starting to make climate resilient systems as well. Because if then there is a flood, your public health concern is taken care of, because people are not just using this as an opportunity to empty their waste along the floods. Or if there is a drought, your sewer systems are not suffering because there's not enough water to flush things down, right? So tons of these basic things that we can do have an impact in terms of climate resilience. I'm just going to conclude by saying, here's 3 examples that I gave you on what to think about when we think about urban water and sanitation systems in the point of resilience, and 4 very simple, I won't go into details, but 4 very simple principles. And I'm going to borrow from what Marianne, David, and Tural said, which is, number 1, community involvement. You cannot design systems to be resilient because oftentimes we think from an engineering perspective that, okay, here's how we build resilient system, and we forget the human part of it. If the humans are not adapting to climate shocks, then even if you have the most advanced engineering systems, they're not going to function if the humans don't know, okay, I'm going to pull this lever down, right? Number 2 is equitable interventions. We cannot create climate resilience at a city scale because cities are not homogeneous. They are heterogeneous. And we cannot put some of the fancy solutions just in the areas where the upper quintile of the population live, and places where informal settlements, like you can do whatever you want, or they are often the most vulnerable. So when we design solutions, we need to think about equity. Number 3 is maladaptation. One of the popular solutions for sanitation systems is, hey, let's just build the toilets at a height so that when it floods, the systems are intact. But then you have to think about, what about the disabled people? What about the older people? What about people who don't have access, the same physical access to these? So start to think about certain solutions that you think are adaptive to certain categories of people. Are they creating maladaptations to others? Or over-resilience on certain water-based systems, which then are very highly suitable for floods, but then during droughts, they're not, right? So really think about reducing maladaptation risks. And finally, for all this to work, planning. And when I say planning, it's about whether you're using a cascading urban water system, or whether you're starting to think about equity, or whether you're starting to think about financing. All of them come together in the planning stage. And one of the biggest risks is, if the right agencies are not talking to each other, then that by itself is a huge maladaptation. So I'll finish right there, and I hope that gives us a framework to think about.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much. I don't hear an applause for Abishek. Absolutely, absolutely. That was brilliant. So we heard about 3 examples, 4 guiding principles, the whole moving to a decentralized water recycling and reuse approach, which aids the removal of the potential for systems failure, for causing cascading and synchronous effects, and certainly has the co-benefit of building resilience. The approach of blending nature-based infrastructure with hard infrastructure in spaces that are quite limited. Certainly from where I come from, SIDS, Caribbean SIDS, this is something that is of extreme value, particularly for the city centers. It's a rapidly urbanized part of the world. We heard about storing floodwater as a means of addressing some of the water deficits that emerge as we go through this particular cycle, repurposing mining areas. And again, it brought me back to my own, this is my own country where we did quite a lot of bauxite mining. And so we had lots of craters that could become ponds for storing water. We saw them as being more of a nuisance causing flooding, but rather than as an opportunity to provide a solution. And then you talked about the development goals and focus on the roles that toilets are playing in creating some of the climate challenges. One, that we're not tracking it enough to be able to provide the information at scale, but recognizing that this is something that needs to be measured so that we can effectively treat with it. And then you enumerated your sort of four principles: community, involvement, equity, maladaptation, and planning. Thank you so much. And certainly we've heard the articulation of a range of excellent perspectives from our erudite panelists, reflecting the diverse set of issues and sharing their experiences. With that, I know we started late. We're up on 12 o'clock, but I think it would be remiss of me if I did not allow for our audience to be able to pose 1 or 2 questions to our panelists. And I see Alexandra's being quick off the draw, so you get the first question.
Thank you very much, everyone. Very insightful panel. I want to have my question goes for all the panelists, starting with you, Abishek, and also Tural. It's about what you said, Abishek, on planning. The planning process, being an urban planner, I can tell you, is extremely complicated and takes time. You're talking about a horizon of 15 to 20 years. How do you foresee, in terms of the urgency of the matter, mobilizing across domains, public health, in the case of city zoning, infrastructure deployment, a planning process that can connect the dots across all these domains? It sounds futuristic. Some would say wishful thinking. But in your experience, but also Tural, Baku and Azerbaijan is a very centralized administrative system and the governmental system. How do you see that also going beyond that top-down approach? So horizontally, but also across the domain, how to deploy all these strategies in a way that we, at the end, we have the production of co-benefits, benefits across all domains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe I can quickly start to, you're right, planning is one of the most complicated processes. If you ask me in a city who's the most important person, it's probably not the mayor, it's the planner, right? Because the mayor would leave in 4 years or 5 years, but the plans will live on. And that's my first point. Plans shouldn't be this one document that has been written 20 years ago and that's the guiding framework. For plans need to be alive. They need to be living documents, number one. And number two, for that to actually happen, we should shun this master planning approach where we are doing the most complicated plan of every single possible urban service that needs to be thought about, all coming into this one 1,000-page document. I think lots of cities do that, and lots of cities failed doing that in terms when it comes to implementation. But I think what I've seen that really works is modularity. To start thinking about saying, here's the first principles, and here's certain things that we have recognized as important to us, both through community engagement, but also through hard data-based evidence, is to then create, because oftentimes one of the biggest problem with planning is there's not enough funding to make the master plan come alive within that cycle of the plan. So if we can start thinking it from a modular perspective, that the modularity can be both spatial or in terms of, or can be thematic in terms of saying, hey, let's solve stormwater here, let's solve urban drainage or urban water systems there, etc. And start stacking up those modular solutions. I think that seems to have worked quite well in resource-constrained settings. And I'm often, when I talk about these sort of ideas, I'm not necessarily thinking about New York or Geneva, but often thinking about those rapidly urbanizing areas where the peri-urban regions have almost no basic services that have reached, whether it's Addis Ababa or whether it's Bangalore or whether it's Dhaka, where we really have this opportunity to start thinking about co-benefits from multiple services and integration of, for example, solid organic waste and fecal waste that can be composted together. So there's tons of low-cost solutions which provide us these opportunities to integrate. And I think the way forward is really thinking of it in a modular perspective, which makes us handle the complexity, but also gives funding at the right time so that we can stack things up. That I will pass on to Tural, the political scientist.
we have also two panelists online, just in case you want to jump in on that question. It was posed to all our panelists, so do feel free if you have a perspective on the question, particularly on motivating the legislature, which is the complex challenge faced by many planners. Yeah.
Yes, if I can comment on that, I think.
Just before you come in, Marianne, I think he wants. I think Alexander wants.
Just to bounce back on what Abishek said, I do believe completely what you said is very true, and scaling down is also a matter of cost. Planning process is extremely costly, and when you scale down, spatially, I mean, you scale down to the neighborhood, to the street, to the building, whatever. You also reduce the cost of the planning process with the possibility of higher yield and higher results, optimize the result.
Go ahead, Marianne.
That could be the motivation.
Go ahead, Marianne.
Thank you. Yes, just to add, as you also said, Ron, how to motivate the legislator. I would just like to give us not to shy away from the very sometimes slow and cumbersome processes of legislative and regulatory updates. I mean, there is no reason to delay those things to get our incentives right, in a sense, which is a way of also coordinate or nudging all actors to work towards similar goals, but they have to be supported by legislation and regulation, and not least building codes. So that would be my main advice. And also just to say that I'm slightly hopeful. Just actually, when I was still with UNDP, I commissioned a report on cooperation opportunities in relation between water supply and also water resources management. And one thing that came out was that actually it seems like the crisis of climate change made in-city water operators be more amenable to discuss and look into upstream watershed management. And same thing, that water resources manager became more aware of the needs of cities. So it seemed that climate change was actually a help to bring all the actors to the same table. So maybe in spite of difficulties, I think there is hope.
Great, a message of hope. Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. Maybe to elaborate on your question, Alexander, and what you have said, and also top-down kind of management versus bottom-up. I think that there are two clearly identifiable planning strategies of the planning-based development and project-based development. So in some countries, you see that heritage and history based on planning-based development, which should be somehow for 20 years, everything should be clearly done and executed. And in some countries, we see clearly that development goes more in project-based, in neighborhood scale or urban scale. So there is no master plan or planning-based development which can be 100% executed. That doesn't exist. So if the master plan executed for more than half or 50%, it's already successful. And especially when it comes to the countries where we see the transitioning from one system brutally to another one, in case of Azerbaijan and post-Soviet states, from top-down management and planning system, which has been for 20 years now, we shifted into the transitioning system where it's more project-based. We need to clearly identify what is the better option for a city to develop. So in Baku, we see clearly now it's more project-based, whereas the city was lacking for 20 years of master plan. And now the new master plan is elaborated by an international company, but we see also parallelly that project-based development is going on. So we need also to understand if it's project-based, how it relies on the culture and on the local specific and also history of planning of the city, because that will be the best way. And when I said about the double effects of multifunctional spaces or multi-effect strategies, basically redefining and reinventing waterfronts or coastal areas, it could also be on project-based, basically project-based ecological belts, biodiversity areas, flexible zone, anticipatory zones, which should be also somehow integrated into the overall planning of the city. But we clearly need to identify where there will be more vulnerable places toward heat waves and floods, where we need to have more project-based development, and which also could be under the overall planning for development of the city.
Go ahead, David. I see that you've raised your hand to come in. Please do go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Just wanted to add one level of complexity to the question. And it's because one thing is to plan for the formal side of the urban economy. A completely different thing is to plan for the informal side of the urban economy. On the one hand, and I'm going to just oversimplify my example, my statement with this example. On the one hand, you can expect people to approach the local government and require construction permits and so on. On the other side, it just doesn't happen. And that is because there are social, economic, cultural, and legal gaps that prevents that from happening. So the planning needs to take into account those realities, and local governments must have the right processes and systems to address these gaps. That is one part. The other point that I wanted to make is that usually, let's say, planning cycles, they are not consistent with political cycles. So every time you have a new mayor, you just have new objectives. And one way of solving that has worked in different cities was what was mentioned before. Actually, the planner becomes a very important figure. In the case of Curitiba in Brazil, it is the IPUC, the Institute for Urban Planning, the one who kind of like guides urban development policies and so on. And basically the mayor supports those policies, any mayor who's in office, and they follow through. So you have longer development cycles. And Medellin, again, they take even one step further. Basically, the mayor campaigns on not who has the best plan, but on who can implement better and more efficiently the existing plan, which is a 20-year plan. And all of this happens underpinned by robust and strong participatory processes, because local governments are highly unstable, but the academia, communities, and other actors, they are the ones who remain there. They are the ones who look for specific results that sometimes require longer times of implementation. So they are the ones pushing for the initial objectives. That's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, I think I have to end or really interesting panel. I had lots of questions for you, and I'm sure the audience also had questions. But I think Alexander got us going into what I do prefer, a much more dynamic exchange around the issues. So it's not just that we're doing our PowerPoint presentation, but speaking to some of the issues and ramping off of some of those issues. And I think you expertly, the four of you expertly, navigated one question and gave us some very interesting insights into different perspectives around that one question. So we heard about a number of cases across different geographies, contexts. You heard a little bit about what UNDP is doing around this issue related to our urban resilience flagship and how we're addressing nature-based solutions. I think one of the interesting things that also came from the responses to the question was the opportunities that climate change is providing for our city planners and other stakeholders to start to look also at some of the upstream related issues. How are we looking outside of the scope of simply the city to some of the challenges that are outside of the city that can impact the life of the residents of our cities. We heard about different principles and examples around how we get people to really be positive around tackling what is a challenge, so looking for the opportunities. And we heard about from Abishek some ways in which we can look at the decentralization process and recycling as a solution. We saw in cases where it's done, where this idea around adaptable coastal cities in Baku and how you actually did it. So I think that's all positive. So with that, let me take this opportunity to thank our esteemed panelists.